So, hi everyone. I am Katie, and I am going to.
ကျွန်မနာမည်က Katie ဖြစ်ပါတယ်။ကျွန်မရဲ့မြန်မာစာကအရင်မကောင်းတဲ့အတွက်တည်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်အင်္ဂလိပ်လိုပဲစကားပြောပြသွားပါတော့မယ်။ဆိုတော့ပထမဆုံးအနေနဲ့ကဒီဆွေးနွေးပွဲကနေပြီးတော့အားလုံးကိုကျေးဇူးတင်ရှိပါတယ်လို့ပြောချင်ပါတယ်။ဆိုတော့ဒီနေရာမှာဆိုရင်တော့ဒီမှာဆွေးနွေးကြရမယ့်အစားကကြတော့
So these are the objectives of this seminar. It's not really a workshop. So the first, defining the focus of your post-secondary program, then deciding what subjects to include, the issues in the selection of appropriate content and tasks, and how ways to source suitable material for these subjects. So have which is that you should consider once you are more established, which I think a lot of you are. And we encourage you to email us if you would like a more comprehensive curriculum development workshop. So starting point at secondary, ask yourself to achieve. You can also phrase this as what are our program aims, or what's our, and if you don't already have program aim or mission, you might like to just write a short paragraph outlining the focus, the values, the guiding principles, and any practical information about your school. Here are a few examples. It's good to do as metaphors for each long it lasts and want from your words, because this is the thing that students, families are going to look at when they are trying to decide whether to go to whether to attend. Or not. Quite important to have a clear and stated aim or mission statement, is that all your everything you do in your need with, so your skills, your of your subject choices, methodologies, and organizational processes, is they need to all work together to meet the aims and the mission. So, for example, there is no point in having rigid discipline and rote learning if your mission is to produce critical thinkers and empowered actors. Similarly, a course focusing on community management might not need a course on advanced English grammar. So the mission is the first guiding principle from which you will decide on your subjects and what you're going to teach. Okay, so what subjects are you going to include? This depends on the aims or mission of your program, the needs of your students, the capacities of your teachers, and what other educational options there are available. So if students already have a lot of like English teaching academies in your area, they might not need another school that focuses specifically on English. However, if there is no environmental management courses available in your area, and you might want to include that as a subject. The most important one, of course, being the needs of your students. So what's their prior knowledge? Are they mostly middle school graduates, people who had to not
ထားတဲ့အသိပညာလေးတွေကပါလဲဆိုတာလေးတွေကိုလည်းပြန်လည်စဉ်းစားပေးရမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်။သူတို့ဒီရဲ့ပညာရေးအရေးချင်းတွေကဘယ်လိုလဲအလဲတဲ့ကျောင်းသူတွေလားတက္ကသိုလ်ကနေပြီးတော့ပဲထွက်ထားရတဲ့သူတွေလားသို့မဟုတ်အင်္ဂလိပ်တွေကျောင်းတွေထဲမှာပညာသင်ဘူး
What are their aims? Are they trying to get into international universities? Are they wanting the skills and knowledge to work in community-based organizations? Are they people who are likely to be teaching in local schools? The gap between A and B is the content and skills you need to cover in your school. So basically the gap between where they are now and where they need to be is what they need to learn. And the tools you need to determine student needs, there's a lot of them. There are entire workshops you can do on assessing and identifying student needs. A formal needs assessment process is one tool, and there are a lot of different formats for that. Interviewing students, surveying students, and one that I totally recommend you do of incoming students is diagnostic testing. That's just to pinpoint what it is they already know. Now, one advantage of detailed needs assessment is to keep your program realistic. For example, if your students have very little English, they're not going to pass a GED exam after only 1 year of teaching. If they have had no experience with working on community-based projects, they aren't going to be able to do advanced monitoring and evaluation until they've had experience of the project management cycle. One thing I've noticed with a lot of programs in Myanmar is they try to do a lot of things very quickly. So the 1-year GED program, like if you're going to have a 1-year GED program, make sure that your diagnostic testing identifies people who are already reasonably fluent in English. Interviews are useful for telling you about students' prior education experience and also their future plans and what they consider their own strengths and weaknesses, which is useful to inform your teaching. Whereas surveys are more useful for getting data from large numbers of students and can find out about overall experiences, aims, interests, practical information, like how long are they able to study, how much free time do they have to do independent study, whether a face-to-face online or blended program might be the most practical for them. Another major determinant of what it is you are going to include in your program is the capacity of your teachers. So what are they comfortable to teach? What subjects, what languages can they teach in, and what resources do you have to help your teachers? Can you hire more teachers if you decide you really want to include gender studies, but there's no one around? Can you hire someone? And what training is available to help your teachers? One thing about the training sector in Burma is it's much easier to find relevant trainings on teaching skills than it is to find training on how to teach specific subjects, depending on the subject. So, for example, Motu can offer general teacher training and how to teach social science and civic education activities, but we don't currently offer how to teach mathematics. I'm pretty sure the other training providers around would also focus more on general subjects. There's a lot of online stuff available from international online training providers and from local training providers. With the international ones like Coursera or big international companies, just ensure that they are a good fit in terms of language or context. I've studied a few online training courses, and some of them are more focused on the context of the country that they are designed for, rather than internationally. It's one thing to look out for. But in general, the human resources your school has will determine which subjects at what levels you are able to offer. IELTS preparation courses require teachers with high proficiency in English. Teacher training courses require experienced trainers who've themselves attended formal training. If you want to offer science or civics or cooking courses, you need to find someone with knowledge and skills to teach science, civics, or cooking. All teachers, even very experienced ones, will benefit from being able to attend regular trainings. So look for what is around. And teachers with some experience could benefit from training on specializations like socio-emotional learning or more advanced lesson planning or evaluation. And there's a lot of organizations that can offer these. So encourage your teachers to seek out the most useful options. So, resources. After you have decided what subjects, what level you want to teach them at, and the language of instruction, you have two choices in terms of teaching resources. Teachers can develop their own, or you can look for something appropriate to use or adapt. So now I'm just going to step aside and focus on two very useful concepts when deciding on the materials you're going to teach. The first one is the zone of proximal development. So the concept of the zone of proximal development involves there are things that you can do, that your students can do, and there are things that your students can't do. And then there's the stuff in the middle, and that's the zone of proximal development. Now, there's no point in teaching students things they can already do. And outside the circle, the things that they can't do are too hard to teach at the moment. Trying to learn things they can't do would just be very frustrating. So you want to try to keep your teaching within the zone of proximal development, which is the stuff that students can do with help. And that help comes from the teacher and the teaching material resources they have. Basically, the zone of proximal development is about the things that your students can do, plus about 10% more. And that's where you're aiming for. Things they can do with help. The zone of proximal development theory was developed by Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky. And the idea is that if the student is in the zone of proximal development for a task, support will help them to achieve it. And that support comes from the teacher or resources, but also from the other students. Vygotsky was very enthusiastic about group work as a form of support. And that support is known as scaffolding, and which is a range of teaching techniques to help students within the zone of proximal development. It's basically scaffolding is anything that will help students to acquire the new skills and knowledge. The idea is that first the student, with assistance from scaffolding, will master the task or master the new information. Then you take away the scaffolding and the student can do that on their own. And then the zone of proximal development increases to the, gets bigger and bigger as you go. If you're interested in the zone of proximal development, just look it up on the internet. There are a lot of videos and resources on this. Now, the other useful concept for choosing teaching materials is the learning burden. Now, the thing about the learning burden is that is especially relevant if you are teaching in a language that is not students' own mother tongue. But basically, it's that students are often have to learn too many things at the same time. So if you are teaching new information, new content, but you are teaching it in an unfamiliar language, they are struggling with two different things, trying to learn the new information and at the same time trying to learn the new language. If you are teaching them new skills in a subject they don't know very much about, that also increases the learning burden. If you are teaching in an unfamiliar learning context, for example, maybe your students are only used to memorizing things and you are trying to get them to think critically, that might not be familiar with them, so they might struggle to learn the new ideas that you are trying to teach. So basically, make only one of these things the focus. So if you are focusing on students learning new ideas about governance, it might be make sure that the language they are learning in is familiar. So that might mean simplified English, or it might mean they're teaching it in their own language. Because, yep, if you want them to focus on the ideas, make the language easy. If you want your students to learn research skills, don't start by teaching them using very difficult tasks. Start off with easy tasks until they are more familiar with the skill. If you are teaching English, make sure that the skills that you are trying to teach are familiar to the students. So make everything as easy as you can, except for the one thing you are trying to focus on. And that will reduce the learning burden on the students and allow them to focus on the main learning goal of what you are teaching at any one time. So to reiterate, if students are trying to learn new ideas in a new language taught in ways they are not familiar with, they are less likely to retain they are less likely to retain the key learning points you are focusing on. For example, if you want your students to be able to design a research project, which is a new skill, it's best if they can do it using a familiar language and on a familiar topic. If you want your students to investigate the effects of climate change in rural Karen state, which is new content for them, it is easier to do that in a familiar language using familiar teaching methodology. And if you want your students to read an essay in English, which is a new language for them, it is easiest if that essay is on a familiar topic and in a familiar format. Okay, at this point, I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions. If there's no questions, I'll keep going, but feel free at any time to ask me a question or write it in the chat box. Okay, what are we got? Okay, all right. Now, back to resources for teaching. Now, sometimes your school might want to develop your own resources. This is going to be the case if there are no resources that are already available, or if you have teachers with sufficient expertise and confidence in their topic to do this. The advantages are these resources are going to be a much more exact fit for your students' needs. If you are teaching about agricultural management in Putao, you are probably one of the leading world experts on agricultural management in Putao. There is unlikely to be a textbook that will work. So you are going to want to develop your own resources on this. And you can train, and another advantage is you can change them very easily while you are teaching. If you've developed it and it's much too difficult for the students, and you find it's much too difficult for them, then just make it easier. You can do it. You've got a soft copy on your computer probably, and you can be as creative as you like. I mean, developing teaching resources is really fun. That's why I decided to do that as basically my life's work, because I really enjoy developing teaching resources. Yeah, you can't always find appropriate materials. There might not be anything on your subject. There might be nothing written for your context. And the context might be either Myanmar or the context might be Putao. There might not be anything written at the right level. So you might, for example, some subjects, you might only find master's level material, which is too difficult for your students, or you might only be able to find material targeting primary school students. that's often a big problem if you're teaching first language literacy, because a lot of the materials on first language literacy are developed for young children, but if you're teaching post-secondary students, they don't want to read all about animals who go out to the market. They're probably going to want to read different topics to that. And now, in the last few years, developing your own text has become so much easier because of ChatGPT. It's brilliant. I love ChatGPT. You can just write in a brief summary of what you want and tell it to write a 300-word text on agricultural management in Putao, and then ChatGPT will write it. And then you'll probably have to spend a bit of time correcting everything they got wrong. But yeah, it's a real help. The disadvantages to developing your own resources are that it takes a lot of time. And if you have to teach at the same time, it's like lesson planning, but takes a lot longer. It requires expertise and confidence. So new teachers might not be confident to develop their own resources. And the other problem is quality control. If you don't have people who can edit it for you, you don't know that these are good materials until you've tested them on your students. The process for developing your own resources, simplified version of this process, is firstly, develop an outline. So think of all the how much time you want to spend on the subject, and then develop an outline, divided into units, with each unit having a summary and objectives to align with your curriculum. Write the content, write all the information that you want your students to read. And then develop the learning tasks, the exercises and activities you want to do in the classroom. And then get someone to edit it. You can send it to Motu if you want, just please not all of you at the same time. We would be happy to help if it's a subject we know about. Or ask one of your colleagues, because your colleagues know the students as well as you do. So, but do try to get somebody to edit it and give you feedback. And then use it in your classroom. And as you are using it, make the changes that you can see work or don't work. Now we have a good question here. How can we reduce the learning burden of students in teaching new language by using new learning content? Aha. Now, so Konlung, I think what you are interested in learning is content and language instruction. There is
content လေးတွေကိုလေ့လာသင်ယူခြင်းအဖြစ်ကိုလို့ short ချလို့ရမလဲဆိုတာကိုမိကုံးမေးထားလာတယ်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆိုပထမဆုံးအနေနဲ့ကကြတော့ contact နေနဲ့ language တွေအသစ်တွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့အနေနဲ့ကလုပ်ငန်းလုပ်ဆောင်တစ်ချိန်တည်းမှာပဲလုပ်ငန်းလုပ်ဆောင်မဆိုရင်ဘယ်လိုအကောင့်ထဲပေါ်ကြောကြမလဲဆိုတာကိုစဉ်းစားပေးမှုလို့ဖြစ်ပါ
I'll send you some information about it, but essentially, yeah, it's as you are teaching the new content, spend some time to focus on the language that they need to know. So that's one of the ways you can do it. And the other way is simplify one or other of those things while you are focusing on it. So basically, you might want to, for example, translate the content before, at some point while they are doing it in the new language, also provide a mother tongue explanation for it. That's one thing you can do. And then look at it in the new language and spend a bit of time explaining the language. That takes time. That's the only drawback with that. Okay, now, if you are using existing resources for teaching, there are advantages and disadvantages about that too. The advantages of using existing resources is that it saves you time and effort. That's the main, overwhelmingly big advantage, is you don't have to create resources. Another advantage is hopefully these resources are created by people who know the topic well. Hopefully you can rely on the expertise of the person who wrote the resources to give you the correct and useful and most up-to-date information about it. And also, they are hopefully made by people who are pedagogical experts, by people who know what is a good textbook, who know what are good learning activities. And you can always adapt ready-made resources. You don't have to just teach them from page 1 to page 355 exactly in order, exactly doing everything. Use your supplement them with your own ideas, or skip all the parts that are not that useful to you. Disadvantages of existing materials as well, if you buy them commercially from commercial companies, they might cost a lot. Especially university textbooks from America or Australia. Some of them can cost like $100 or more just for one textbook if you want the latest version. Another disadvantage is they might not be designed for your context. And actually, one of the reasons Motu exists is because a group of teachers about 20 years ago were teaching in post-secondary schools, and we just could not find materials. We were trying to teach social science subjects, and people would people were sending materials from New Zealand to me, and I was looking at them going, this is not useful. It's all about New Zealand. It's not about Burma. People don't need to learn all this stuff. And also the language is much too high. That it was just a bad fit for the students I was trying to teach. And so after that, a group of us got together and said, we need to do something about that. And the organization that later became Motu was formed to address that exact problem. Also, they might not be the right language or level. They might be designed for young children, or they might only be designed for higher level university students. Materials written in native level English are probably not suitable for first year post-secondary students, and the teacher might have to put a lot of work into themselves trying to understand the language in order to explain it to the students. So adapting resources is something that most teachers do. I hope if you are using Motu resources that you adapt them, because although Motu resources are written for the Myanmar context, they're not necessarily written for your exact context, and there are things in them that are probably that you know better than the people at Motu who wrote them. So there's a few common problems here, and I've offered a few solutions. One problem is you've got a short course and a big textbook, and you will just have to decide which parts you want to focus on and which parts you want to miss. If you think all of it is very useful, just assign students independent reading. If the textbook doesn't include all the topics you want, you might have to design your own units. ChatGPT can help. Again, the textbook is written for a different context, and you might need to substitute information in the textbook with information for your own country and region. It might be just simple, just change the name. In language textbooks especially, just change the names or change the places or change the currency for stuff relevant to your context, or skip the parts that are completely irrelevant, or supplement it with local case studies. If the language is too high for your students, translate or simplify. Or there are various techniques, back to what Kon Long was asking about. There are various techniques in content-based language instruction that involve things like giving students the key vocabulary at the beginning of the lesson, or explaining key concepts to them before they have to read the text, that will help them, that will scaffold them and help them understand it. Some textbooks don't actually have tasks. All they are is information, and you might have to add your own tasks. I would suggest you add both exercises that check student understanding, like comprehension tasks, and activities where students apply information to their own context, or look more deeply into the subject, or do a project, or there are so many different kinds of activities that you could do, and Motu has books about activities that you can download from our website if you are looking for activity ideas. And just discussions, add discussion topics. Students can learn a lot from each other. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development totally emphasizes the use of group work, where students help to scaffold each other's learning. Another problem is with textbooks is the only textbook you have is a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and one more round of photocopying is not going to work. There's not a lot you can do about that, unfortunately, other than scanning or trying to generate new texts. Supplementary resources. There's a lot out there. YouTube videos, podcasts, games, regularly looking at current events and discussing them, books and magazines. And one underused resource I find in post-secondary schools is online asynchronous courses. There's tons and tons of courses out there that you can use to help to actually help you to plan what you are teaching, and that your students can study. Either you can use them in class, or you can assign them to students for homework. Remote U is one of them. Motu is currently trying to put all our courses online so that teachers can use them either in class or to assign students to do outside of class, but also there's plenty of others as well, like Coursera and Khan Academy. And there's some synchronous and there's some synchronous, asynchronous courses developed locally, like I know that Virtual Federal University has some quite good courses on it, on things like federalism and political science and research skills. Spring University Myanmar has some excellent courses as well. Yep, take a look at them, see if any of them might be useful for your students, either as a core course or a supplementary course. British Council Myanmar is good for English language courses too. We've compiled a selection of context-appropriate courses designed for Burma, and they are available at the PSEF Myanmar site under Learning Resources. We've tried to include every context-appropriate resource that we can find. If you know of any good ones that we haven't listed there, tell us, because we want to have as comprehensive a resource library as we can. So, to conclude, alignment. Remember, in all this, alignment is very, very important. So your school should have their aims or mission. Make sure that your subjects align with the mission. And make sure that within your subject, your unit objectives, your teaching objectives, and your lesson objectives align with the mission. The resources you use should be aligned with the mission. The learning tasks you use should be aligned with the mission. The assessment you use should be aligned with the mission. Hopefully your mission is fairly broad, so hopefully it won't be too hard to align this with the mission. But yep. Now, some of you sent me some questions before the workshop, and I've chosen some of these questions that I will answer now. And of course, you can ask me more questions after this as well. One very good question was, how can we address students' concerns about their future plans after completing their educational journey within the current situation? And yeah, that's a really, really hard one to answer, aside from to say, hopefully the situation will change soon. But one thing that you can do is you can include a course on something like career planning, like maybe a short course for graduating students or a longer course throughout your program. Like, there are different tasks students can do to consider their own strengths and weaknesses and to investigate possible future jobs that they can go to after they graduate. You might consider adding student counseling to what you do. You might decide to hire someone who can focus on guidance counseling or careers counseling. There might be organizations who do careers counseling that you can network with. Does anyone else have any good ideas to answer that question, by the way? Because I'm really interested to know how we can solve this problem myself.
To be honest, I have no answer yet too.
Okay, I mean, it's basically something that post-secondary forum might consider focusing on, is careers counseling or guidance counseling, because there's a huge demand for it. Okay, number 2, what should be considered in curriculum development? Are there basic frameworks for that? Yes, there are millions of them. And if this was your question, just email me and I will email me with some specifics about what you're looking for, and I will send you some framework documents that you might find useful. Are there any online curriculum development courses? Yes, there are. There are international ones. I think Udemy and Coursera have curriculum development online trainings. Motu doesn't yet have an online curriculum development course. We are working on it. We hope to have one ready for you in the future. I'm not sure how long it will take, but we are working on this. How should we operate our school to be aligned with college education standards? Now, the thing is, there's no actual college education standards, because every college in the world has its own standards. There are good, some are higher level than others. So the thing is, what is a college is very broad. Like Oxford University and lots of other colleges do not have the same standards. My advice, if this is something you would like to do, is to find a college or university that you like or that is similar to what you are aiming for, and look very closely at what it is they are doing and do the same thing as much as possible. If you can look for other schools to form partnerships with to work on this. How could the post-secondary schools collaborate to advocate for educational system change in Myanmar? Excellent question. Now, that's something the post-secondary forum is looking into doing. So join the post-secondary forum. That is one way you can do that. We at the post-secondary forum really encourage active membership to work on advocacy for educational system change. It's really important, and we want to do that. Okay, we have another question here. How can we adjust the alignment among the vision and mission of the program of students and the desired situation of the community? So if you have a mismatch between the vision and mission of the program and what the students want and what the community wants, well, there's a few options. One is to broaden your program so that, as well as what you are currently doing, you offer courses that are more what these students and these community members want. I mean, what I'm assuming is, because not all students and not all community members are going to want the same thing. I'm thinking of a situation, for example, where a school wants to teach a broad-based program emphasizing leadership skills and civic values, and the students just want to pass an international GED exam and go overseas, which is a situation we have encountered. What you need to do is you need to convince your students of the benefit of a broader knowledge than just, for example, than just focusing on the thing that they think they want to learn. And you might need to run some workshops on the benefits of a broader based education and how that can help them achieve their aims. Okay, yeah. So Connor has just pointed out that we set a sharing day for these bigger questions, like a future search. Yep, that's a great idea. That's a really good idea. Or because yeah, the thing is, there were a lot of other questions that people asked in the pre-registration, but that A, I don't know the answers to, or B, that are a bit outside the deciding what to teach in this workshop. Okay, any more questions?